The hum of the hearing room died the instant Jasmine Crockett lifted the thin manila folder from her desk. Alina Habba had been speaking for almost 12 minutes, smooth, deliberate, confident. Her tone carried the polish of a lawyer who had spent years commanding microphones and cameras. She was explaining, for the third time, that her client had been unfairly targeted by politically motivated prosecutors. Then Crockett spoke. "Ms. Habba," she said evenly, her voice slicing through the room like a blade through glass. "Before you continue with your defense of selective prosecution, I want to clarify one thing." Habba looked up, ready to spar. "Of course, Congresswoman." Crockett opened the folder. The paper made a soft, tearing sound, a whisper that somehow filled the air. "You've stated under oath that you've had no access to internal materials from the New York Attorney General's office. Is that correct?" "That's correct," Habba replied quickly. Crockett's eyes never left her. "And you're certain of that?" "Absolutely. We've seen only what's been filed publicly." Crockett nodded slowly once. Then she reached into the folder and pulled out a single document, a photocopy of an official-looking memo stamped confidential. OAG New York Files / internal use only. Across the room, a producer whispered, "Is that real?" Crockett laid the document flat on the table between them. "Then perhaps you can explain this," she said. Habba leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "What am I looking at?" "You're looking at a section of the Attorney General's internal indictment draft," Crockett said. "Specifically, an early version of paragraph 16, the one referring to asset inflation." A murmur rippled through the press benches. "Now," Crockett continued, her tone still clinical, "this draft was dated 2 weeks before the official filing. And yet," she turned the paper slightly, "your handwritten margin notes appear on it." Habba's jaw twitched. "That's impossible," she said. "I've never seen that document before." Crockett's voice didn't rise, it sharpened. "Ms. Habba, your handwriting has been verified in 6 separate legal filings, including the Palm Beach property disclosures. The match is conclusive." The chair of the committee leaned forward. "Congresswoman Crockett, are you asserting that the witness had access to sealed material?" "I'm not asserting anything," Crockett replied. "I'm presenting evidence that does." Habba tried to recover her footing. "This is absurd. That could have been forged. Anyone could." Crockett slid another sheet forward. "This email chain was recovered through subpoena from a private consulting firm, Eastwood Analytics, which lists you as client counsel. In it, a staffer refers to the Letitia draft notes Alina marked up. Would you like to read it into the record, or should I?" Habba froze, color draining from her face. "Those emails were privileged communications," she said. "Then you admit they exist," Crockett said quietly. The silence was total. No camera moved. No aide breathed. Crockett continued. "Let's be clear. You just confirmed access to internal indictment materials 2 weeks before the public release. That's a felony under New York Penal Code 195.07, unlawful procurement of government documents." Habba's lawyer shifted in his seat, whispering, "Don't respond." But Crockett wasn't done. She opened the folder again, pulling out a photograph, grainy, time-stamped. It showed Habba entering a glass office building in Lower Manhattan, late at night. This photo was taken outside 28 Liberty Street, the New York Attorney General's office, at 10:47 p.m. on September 19th, 3 days before the draft in question was altered. "Care to explain what you were doing there after hours, Miss Habba?" Habba swallowed hard. "That's not me." Crockett leaned closer, voice low but clear. "Then why does the building's entry log show your name?" A gasp swept through the reporter's row. Someone muttered, "Oh my God." Habba's hands shook slightly as she reached for the microphone. "Congresswoman, this is political theater." "No," Crockett said softly. "This is oversight." The chair banged the gavel once, but no one heard it over the hum of chaos spreading through the room. Habba tried to speak again, but her voice caught. "You're misinterpreting." Crockett lifted the document and read the note aloud, her tone clinical, deliberate. "Strike paragraph 16, too aggressive. Focus on valuation methodology. LJ won't hold if optics look punitive." She set the paper down. "Those are your words, Miss Habba. And LJ, that's Letitia James, is it not?" Habba stared at her, silent. Crockett tilted her head slightly. "Would you like to amend your testimony?" For a full 10 seconds, Alina Habba didn't move. Then she reached for the glass of water in front of her, hand trembling, and whispered, barely audible. I need a recess. The chair refused. The witness will answer the question. Haba's attorney leaned in. Invoke counsel now. Crockett closed the folder, the sound echoing like a door slamming shut. Madam Chair, she said, her voice calm but final. The witness just confirmed possession of sealed indictment materials. That's criminal conduct. I move to suspend further testimony and refer this to the Department of Justice for review. The gavel struck twice. The session was in recess. Alina Haba didn't look up. The cameras stayed fixed on her, motionless, stunned, cornered. Jasmine Crockett rose slowly, gathering her papers. As she walked out, one microphone caught her whisper to an aide. She wasn't supposed to see that file. But she did. And now the country will too. The hallway outside the hearing room convulsed the moment the gavel fell. A reporter shoved a microphone forward and said, "Did she just admit it?" Another, already live on camera, said, "We have never seen this." A producer with a headset pressed his palm to his ear and said, "Hold. Stay wide. Do not cut." Down the carpeted corridor, a DOJ liaison in a Navy suit moved with purpose. He flashed a badge at the sergeant-at-arms and said, "We'll need a secure room." The sergeant-at-arms nodded and said, "Follow me." Inside the chamber, Alina Haba stayed frozen in her chair. She did not look at the cameras. She did not look at the public rows. She stared at the single sheet on the table as if it were radiating heat. Her attorney leaned close and said, "You will not answer another question without me clearing it." She said nothing. Jasmine Crockett did not join the scrum. She stepped to the edge of the dais, lowered her voice, and said to her chief counsel, "Bring me the blue folio." Her chief counsel said, "Yes, ma'am," and moved. From the press rail, a veteran correspondent with gray hair said, "She said LJ out loud." His younger producer said, "She said it twice." A court reporter reached into a bag, pulled out eye drops, and said, "I have never seen a room go that still." The blue folio arrived. Crockett placed it under her palm and said, "Chain of custody first, then the invoice." Her chief counsel said, "Understood." Across the table, Haba found her voice. It was thin at first. "This is partisan spectacle," she said. Her attorney whispered, "Don't editorialize." She said, "I will not be smeared." Crockett did not respond. She turned to the clerk and said, "Please notify the chair that my next exhibits are time-stamped and notarized." The clerk said, "Yes, Congresswoman." At the door, a network anchor spoke into her camera and said, "We are told there is a second set of documents. The witness has requested a recess. The chair has not granted it." The DOJ liaison returned with two colleagues. He said to the sergeant-at-arms, "When the session resumes, we will sit second row, aisle." The sergeant-at-arms said, "Copy." Inside the witness well, Haba's hands finally moved. She reached for the microphone and said, "For the record, the photograph is misleading." Crockett said, "For the record, the photograph is accompanied by an entry log, a security swipe, and a lobby camera time code." The gallery murmured. A staffer in the back row put both hands on the seat in front of him and said, "Oh my." The chair re-entered, conferred briefly with counsel, and said, "We will reconvene in 3 minutes." A hush rolled forward like a wave receding. Crockett did not look at the cameras. She turned one page inside the blue folio, marked a corner with her thumb, and said to her aide, "When I say Eastwood line item, read the number. Do not read the description." Her aide said, "Yes, Congresswoman." 3 minutes expired. The gavel struck once. The room inhaled. The chair said, "The committee will come to order. Congresswoman Crockett, you may proceed." Crockett said, "Thank you, Madam Chair." She did not raise her voice. She did not change her cadence. "Ms. Haba," Crockett said, "you testified that your team had access only to publicly filed materials. You have now been presented with an internal draft whose margin notes match your handwriting. Before we move forward, you may correct your testimony." Haba drew breath and said, "I do not accept the premise of your documents." Crockett said, "Understood. The record will reflect your refusal to amend." She opened the blue folio. "This," she said, laying down a narrow sheet with boxes and signatures, is a chain of custody ledger kept by a junior analyst in the New York Attorney General's intake unit. He initialed each transfer of the draft indictment. He noted each time the document left the secured docket room. He noted each time it returned. And he noted one irregularity. Crockett tapped the line with her fingernail. He wrote, she said, reading evenly. Removed at 10:54 p.m. by outside counsel under escort. Returned 12:09 a.m. with markups in blue ink. He signed his name beneath it. He dated it. Across the aisle, a congressman whispered, outside counsel? His colleague said, that's not possible. He whispered again, it is now. Haba leaned toward the microphone and said, you can put the word outside on any form you want. It doesn't make it true. Crockett said, then let's attach a name. She slid the second page forward, a visitor log printed in columns. Security recorded your arrival and your exit, she said. They recorded the escort. They recorded the floor. They recorded the room. Haba said, I was there to review media reports. Crockett said, at 10:47 p.m., behind security glass, on a floor restricted to the indictment team? Silence. The chair said, the witness will answer. Haba said, on counsel's advice, I assert attorney-client communications privilege. Crockett said, privilege does not attach to unlawful procurement. The DOJ liaison in the second row made a small note and said to his colleague, flag that line. Crockett turned a page inside the folio and said, we will move to the second point, the conduit. She placed a crisp invoice on the table so the top line faced the witness. This is an invoice from Eastwood Analytics, she said. It is addressed to your law office. The date is 2 days prior to the draft edits. The amount is $28,000 for $100. Her aide leaned in and said, line item 3, Congresswoman? Crockett said, read only the number. Her aide said, reference EA 116. Haba said, consulting firms bill for many things. Crockett said, they do. In this instance, they billed for document access facilitation, which is not a service included in media monitoring. A ripple of low voices moved across the press row. A journalist with a fountain pen said, she said the description. Another said, she said it on purpose. Haba squared her shoulders and said, you are mischaracterizing a routine engagement. Crockett said, then help us characterize it. Who requested EA 116? Who paid it? And what did Eastwood obtain for you? The witness said nothing. Crockett set the invoice aside and said, we will proceed to communications. She lifted a printout and held it at an angle. These are signal messages provided to the committee by a subpoenaed contractor. The redactions are limited to personal phone numbers. The messages are time-stamped. She read, tone flat, cadence precise. Message 1, 22:02 hours. Window is open. If counsel wants clean language, tonight is the night. Message 2, 22:06. We can ghost edit. No chain if we keep it in hard copy. Message 3, 22:11. From a number attributed to your assistant. She's en route. Message 4, 018. Return to file room. Blue ink on para 16. She lowered the page. Ms. Haba, she said quietly, these are not political adjectives. These are time codes. The chair said, counsel for the witness may confer for 60 seconds. Haba's attorney leaned in, placed a hand over the mic, and said, say nothing. Do not correct. Do not deny. Do not embellish. Haba whispered, they have the ledger. He whispered back, say nothing. 60 seconds elapsed. The chair said, proceed. Crockett did not look at them. She looked at the room. For the sake of the record, for the sake of the public, I want to step back, she said. We are not debating a press release. We are not parsing optics. We are examining whether an officer of the court acquired an influenced sealed prosecutorial work product, and then stood in this chamber and told the American people she had seen only what was public. She paused. The pause was intentional. It lasted long enough for the hum of the air system to become audible. Then she turned back. Ms. Haba, she said, I am going to ask you the narrowest version of this question. Did you, personally, or through intermediaries, review a draft of the New York Attorney General's indictment before it was filed? Haba's fingers tightened on the edge of the table. She said, "On counsel's advice, I invoke my Fifth Amendment right." The words landed with a dull, heavy finality. A reporter in the second row said, "There it is." Another said, "She said it. She actually said it." The chair said, "The witness has invoked the Fifth Amendment. The invocation is noted." Crockett did not relax. She turned to the last tab in the blue folio and said, "Two final exhibits." She placed a narrow receipt on the table. "Exhibit 4, she said. A dry cleaning ticket for a navy blazer, logged the morning after the after-hours visit. The note says blue ink stain, cuff, and right palm. The ticket is in your name." Haba blinked hard and said, "This is harassment." Crockett said, "This is corroboration." She laid the final page down gently, as if not to disturb the air around it. "Exhibit 5, she said. A short email from a junior staffer at Eastwood Analytics to his manager. He wrote, quote, "Counsel wants Para 16 softened. Says LJ will never wear it if it looks like punishment. Returning hard copy by escort. Keep my name off." He signed it. He timestamped it. He sent it from a device we have already authenticated. No one moved. The chair said, softly now, "Congresswoman, do you have anything further?" Crockett said, "One sentence." She faced the witness, and for the first time, allowed a small current of feeling to reach her voice. "You told America you saw only what was public," she said. "But your own ink is drying on what was never meant to be seen." Haba did not answer. She could not answer. She stared at the paper with the dry cleaning note, as if the printed words might rearrange themselves into mercy. The DOJ liaison stood. He said to the chair, "Madam Chair, the department respectfully requests copies of Exhibits 1 through 5 for immediate review." The chair said, "The request is granted. The clerk will prepare certified duplicates." Crockett closed the blue folio. The sound was soft, but every head lifted when it came. She said nothing else. In the third row, an older man in a tweed jacket, a lawyer long retired, a watcher of institutions, exhaled and said to no one in particular, "That is what a record looks like." The gavel struck. The hearing moved forward, but the room did not. It stayed fixed on the stillness at the witness table, on the lawyer who had come to speak in confident paragraphs, and now could only sit inside a silence she had chosen for herself. Outside, the cameras waited like weather. Inside, Jasmine Crockett rested her hand on the closed folio and said, very quietly, to her aide, "Bring the gray binder next." Her aide said, "Yes, Congresswoman." "What's in it?" Crockett said, "Phone calls." The air in the hearing room had changed. It wasn't noise anymore, it was tension. The kind that crawls into your throat and stays there. Jasmine Crockett sat perfectly still, one hand resting on the gray binder she'd asked for moments earlier. She didn't open it yet. She waited, deliberately, until the whispering died down, until the last photographer's lens clicked shut. Then she said quietly, "Let's proceed." Across from her, Alina Haba had gone pale. Her lawyer sat stiffly, his jaw locked, eyes darting to the Department of Justice officials now seated only a few feet away. He whispered, "Stay silent." Again, but it was useless. Crockett wasn't going to stop. "Ms. Haba," Crockett began, her tone calm, almost clinical. "I'm now entering into the record a call log pulled from Verizon Business Services under subpoena." She placed the first sheet down. The call took place at 11:08 p.m. on September 19th, roughly 20 minutes after your entry into the New York Attorney General's building. Haba's head moved slightly, but she said nothing. "This number," Crockett continued, tapping the page, "belongs to a government-issued cell phone registered to Deputy Attorney Robert Willis, one of Letitia James' senior advisors. The second number belongs to your personal line." The gallery erupted in whispers. Someone audibly said, "Oh, that's bad." Crockett raised her eyes. The call lasted 3 minutes, 21 seconds. No record of it exists in Mr. Willis's government phone logs. It was deleted, but the carrier log remains. Haba's attorney leaned in. "Congresswoman, there is no confirmation of content." "There's confirmation of contact," Crockett interrupted. And that's enough for a federal review. She turned another page. At 11:13 p.m., immediately after that call, a text was sent from your assistant's phone to an unlisted number. The message reads, and I quote, "Got her blessing. Soften 16. She's scared optics will blow up on us." The silence was suffocating. The kind of silence where you can hear someone swallow across the room. Crockett looked directly at Haba. "Would you like to clarify who she refers to?" Haba's lips parted slightly. "No comment," she said. Crockett nodded once. "Noted." Then she opened the gray binder fully and revealed the next exhibit. A small photograph printed on glossy paper. It showed a woman in a dark overcoat, stepping into a black SUV outside a government building. The timestamp read 11:17 p.m. "This," Crockett said, holding it up so the cameras could see, "is you, Ms. Haba, leaving 28 Liberty Street. You spoke with a senior official inside, made a 3-minute call to the Attorney General's deputy, and then coordinated edits to an active draft of an indictment. Do you deny that sequence of events?" "I invoke my Fifth Amendment right," Haba said. Crockett looked down, exhaled slowly, and said, "That's your right." But her tone carried something different now, the quiet weight of someone who had expected this answer all along. "Madam Chair," she said, turning slightly, "I'm requesting permission to introduce the transcript of a verified voicemail left the following morning on the New York AG's private line." The chair hesitated. "Congresswoman, has it been authenticated?" "It has," Crockett said. "Voice matched by independent forensics to Ms. Haba." Haba's attorney leaned forward. "We object." "Objection noted," the chair said. "Proceed." Crockett pressed play on a small device. The audio was faint at first, but unmistakable. "Tish, it's Alina. We cleaned up 16 like you wanted. It's tighter now, no punishment optics. You're welcome. Call me before the press run." The room froze. Every journalist stopped typing. One of the DOJ officials in the second row sat forward slowly, his eyes narrowing. The voice ended. The playback clicked off. Nobody spoke. Crockett said, "That recording was recovered from a cloud backup mistakenly synced to your assistant's email account." She placed the device down gently. "You said you had no access to internal materials. You said you saw only public filings. You said you acted independently. But the record, your own voice, says otherwise." Haba's lips trembled. She tried to speak, but the words came out fractured. That wasn't official. That was informal context." Crockett's expression didn't change. "You tampered with an indictment, Ms. Haba. You used privileged access to shape the optics of a criminal prosecution, and then you came here to lie about it." The chair banged the gavel once. "Order." But there was no order left. A voice from the press section shouted, "That's a confession." Another, "Is this going to DOJ now?" Haba's lawyer whispered, "End this. Right now." But Crockett leaned forward and said, quietly, surgically, "You can't end what's already documented, Ms. Haba. You can only admit it." The words landed like a strike to the heart. Haba covered her mouth, shaking her head. "You're twisting this." Crockett slid one final page across the table. "This is a sworn statement from a member of the AG's staff. He admits that you were granted unauthorized access. He names the security escort who brought you in. He describes you holding the draft in your hands." The DOJ official rose from his seat. "Madam Chair, we're requesting immediate seizure of exhibits for federal review." The chair nodded, her voice almost lost in the noise. "Granted." Crockett closed the gray binder. "Madam Chair," she said, "the witness's testimony has now been contradicted by voice evidence, call logs, and witness statements. I move that the committee refer this case for criminal investigation." The gavel came down again. Motion carried. Alina Haba leaned back in her chair. She looked small now. The arrogance, the confidence, gone. Her voice came out hollow. "I never thought they'd turn on me," she whispered. Crockett stood, gathered her papers, and spoke without looking back. "They didn't turn on you, Ms. Haba. The truth did." The press cameras exploded with flashes. The sound was relentless, like rain hitting steel. And as Crockett walked calmly from the hearing room, reporters shouted her name. She didn't stop. She didn't smile. Outside the chamber doors, a young staffer asked, "Congresswoman, Was that the end? Crockett paused, her voice measured. No, she said. That was just the beginning of the fallout. By dawn the next morning, the storm had already begun. Cable networks interrupted their regular programming with red banners that simply read, "Haba audio leaked." Every major outlet replayed the same 15 seconds. Jasmine Crockett pressing play. Alina Haba's voice saying, "We cleaned up 16 like you wanted." The clip ran on a loop. CNN, MSNBC, even Fox, cautiously at first, then nonstop once the numbers started spiking. And across the ticker, one line scrolled again and again. Federal investigation pending. Inside the Department of Justice, the internal lights stayed on long past midnight. A joint task force was convened before sunrise. 2 subpoenas were signed by 7 a.m. By 8 o'clock, an unmarked SUV was idling outside Eastwood Analytics. By 9:15, the company's servers were in federal custody. And by 10 a.m., Alina Haba's law firm issued a single-sentence statement. Ms. Haba denies any wrongdoing and will cooperate fully with investigators. But the damage was irreversible. In Washington, corridors that normally buzzed with background chatter went dead quiet when Jasmine Crockett's name came up. Even staffers who had once dismissed her as too bold now spoke in careful tones. They had watched what happened when someone underestimated her, and they wouldn't make that mistake again. That afternoon, Crockett stepped out of her office for the first time since the hearing. The hallway was lined with cameras. A journalist called out, "Congresswoman, did you expect this level of fallout?" Crockett adjusted her folder under one arm and said, "The truth always falls harder than people think it will." Another asked, "Is Letitia James being investigated too?" Crockett stopped, looked at the reporter directly, and said, "If the evidence leads there, the evidence leads there. Nobody gets immunity from accountability." The clip of her saying that went viral within minutes. It was calm, even-tempered, but the weight of it hit like a hammer. By evening, congressional staff were already whispering about sealed warrants. A federal source confirmed to Reuters that the DOJ had opened an obstruction inquiry into the chain of communications between Haba, the Attorney General's office, and Eastwood Analytics. And then, at 6:32 p.m., the real bombshell dropped. A leaked screenshot, authenticated by cybersecurity analysts, showed an internal Eastwood message from months earlier, referencing EA 116. The text read, "Confirming delivery of PARA 16 draft to client counsel. Ensure no digital copy exists. Return by hand." The timestamp matched the night of the call. The sender was a mid-level contractor named Evan Reese. Within an hour, reporters had found him. Standing outside his small apartment in Queens, Reese looked straight into the camera and said, "Yeah, I gave her the file. She said it was to make sure it wouldn't embarrass anyone at the top." Then he added, "I didn't know it was illegal until I saw the hearing." That clip broke the entire narrative open. There was no more spin. No more political persecution line. The facts were public, undeniable, documented, replayed in every household in America. By the next morning, the Attorney General's spokesperson had announced that Letitia James would recuse herself from any involvement in the case, pending federal review. Her deputy resigned 2 hours later, and Alina Haba's office windows were covered with brown paper and tape. Inside the Capitol, as reporters swarmed the corridors, a senior Democrat told CNN off-camera, "What Jasmine Crockett just did, that's not politics. That's history." At 2 p.m., the House Oversight Committee reconvened for a closed-door session. Cameras weren't allowed, but sources later said the atmosphere was electric. The kind of stillness that comes only when everyone in the room realizes they've witnessed something that will change careers and maybe the course of an administration. Crockett sat at the head of the table, quiet, scanning through pages of new evidence. She didn't gloat. She didn't smile. One of her colleagues leaned in and whispered, "You know you just took down half a defense network, right?" Crockett said, "No. I just let the truth do what it always does, finish the work we start." Outside, a handful of protesters had already gathered on the Capitol steps, some calling for resignations, others calling for reform. A sign waved in the air, handwritten in red marker. PARA 16 wasn't supposed to be edited. The movement had begun. By 4 p.m., the DOJ had frozen multiple Eastwood Analytics accounts pending investigation. At 6 o'clock, a federal judge signed an order authorizing the seizure of personal devices linked to Haba and two associates. And at 9 o'clock, Politico ran the headline. Crockett's evidence sparks historic ethics probe into state-federal coordination. That night, in her congressional office, the lights were still on. 8 after 8 stopped by to congratulate her. One of them, a young researcher, hesitated in the doorway and said, "Congresswoman, do you ever get nervous before you drop files like that?" Crockett looked up, tired but composed. She said, "Every time." The aide frowned. "So how do you do it anyway?" She said, "Because nervous doesn't mean wrong. It just means the truth still matters." And that line, quiet, unplanned, became the headline quote the next morning. Nervous doesn't mean wrong. It just means the truth still matters. Representative Jasmine Crockett. That single sentence spread everywhere. News feeds, newspaper columns, podcasts. It was simple. It was grounded. It was real. But for Alina Habba, it was devastating. Her firm's clients began cutting ties. Her media appearances were canceled. Even her most loyal allies started calling her radioactive. The House Committee on Ethics announced a follow-up hearing scheduled for the following week, this time with Habba no longer as a witness, but as a subject. And word quietly spread through the halls that Jasmine Crockett wasn't done. There was still another file, one she hadn't shown yet. Her staff called it the Black Binder. When a reporter asked her about it outside her office, she paused, looked straight into the camera, and said, "The Black Binder's not about what she did. It's about who told her to do it." The entire room of reporters fell silent. And in that silence, even the most skeptical viewer understood this story wasn't over. Not by a long shot. When Jasmine Crockett walked into the hearing room that morning, she carried no notes, no stack of papers, no speech. Only a single black binder, leather, weathered, unmarked. The photographer's flashes were relentless as she set it on the table, her hand resting lightly on the cover as though keeping it from breathing. The committee chair cleared her throat. "Congresswoman Crockett," she said carefully, "you've indicated you have new material to present." Crockett nodded once. "Yes, Madam Chair. This," she said, patting the binder, "is the final piece." A low rumble spread through the room. Everyone knew what that meant. The Black Binder, whispered about for a week, was no longer rumor. Across the aisle, a Republican member leaned toward a staffer and whispered, "If that binder's what I think it is, we're looking at something bigger than Habba." Crockett opened it. The sound of the metal rings snapping apart was sharper than it should have been. Every camera microphone caught it. "Madam Chair," she said, "this committee has already seen the communications between Ms. Habba, the Attorney General's office, and the contractors who facilitated unauthorized document access. What we have not yet addressed," she paused, letting the moment hang, "is who instructed that access." Alina Habba wasn't in the room this time. She was under a gag order, awaiting formal charges. But her absence only made the tension worse. Crockett turned to the first tab. "This exhibit," she said, sliding out a printed email chain, "is correspondence between Ms. Habba and a private account belonging to a senior aide in the former president's legal advisory team, one Mr. Stephen Melrose." A murmur rippled across the hearing room. Melrose was a familiar name, a behind-the-scenes operator, known for managing quiet coordination between Trump's legal and political fronts. Crockett continued, her voice steady. "On September 18th, one day before the night Ms. Habba entered the Attorney General's building, Mr. Melrose sent her an email reading, 'We can't let this indictment look retaliatory. Soften the optics. Get your language in if possible. LJ will cooperate.'" The phrase hung in the air like smoke. "LJ," said the chair, almost under her breath. Crockett nodded. "Letitia James." The room erupted. "Order," the chair shouted, slamming the gavel. "There will be order." But order was gone. This wasn't just about one lawyer's corruption anymore. It was about direct coordination between a state attorney general and political operatives working for the former president. Crockett waited for silence before continuing. "The email was authenticated by the FBI Cyber Division 3 days ago," she said. It was sent from an encrypted Proton Mail account registered to Melrose's consulting firm. That account was used multiple times to coordinate messaging around ongoing criminal cases. A congressman leaned forward, incredulous. Are you saying a member of the former president's legal team directed language changes in an active state indictment? Crockett looked him in the eye. I'm not saying it, she said. He is. She turned the page and began to read aloud from the next exhibit. Confirm when edits are accepted. If LJ hesitates, remind her that funding for re-election support still depends on cooperation. Use Haba as the messenger. She'll handle it discreetly. Gasps filled the room. Reporters whispered the same words over and over, funding for cooperation. The chair spoke again. Congresswoman Crockett, is there proof of payment or quid pro quo? Crockett flipped to the next section. There is, Madam Chair. Exhibit 12B. She held up a single-page bank transfer record. A $75,000 deposit from Melrose Consulting Group to a PAC registered in New York as Citizens for Justice Integrity. That PAC, according to campaign finance filings, funneled money directly to Letitia James' re-election campaign less than 72 hours after the edited draft was returned to the AG's office. The journalists nearly trampled each other trying to capture the image. Madam Chair, Crockett said, her tone grave, this evidence establishes a direct financial trail, political money used to influence legal language in an active prosecution. And Ms. Haba was the courier. Across the room, one of the ranking members muttered, My God. But Crockett wasn't finished. She opened the final section of the binder and laid out 3 cell phone screenshots. These are call records from Ms. Haba's phone, corroborated by carrier logs. 2 nights before the edit, she received a 12-minute call from an unlisted number registered to the Trump International Hotel switchboard. 30 minutes later, she texted Melrose, Got it. She's good to go. Optics will be clean. The room was thunderstruck. There were no shouts, no protests now, just stunned silence. Crockett's voice dropped to a measured whisper. We are no longer talking about individual misconduct. We are looking at a systemic pipeline, political influence funneled into prosecutorial discretion, filtered through private channels, and paid with campaign funds. The chair leaned forward, visibly shaken. Congresswoman Crockett, are you moving to refer this for criminal conspiracy? Yes, Madam Chair, Crockett said, closing the binder slowly. Under 18 U.S. Code Section 371, conspiracy to defraud the United States. The gavel fell once, then twice. The echo was deafening. Reporters ran from the room as if history were sprinting beside them. Phones buzzed. Networks cut to live coverage. And the headline that hit the airwaves within the hour was simple, brutal, final. Crockett's black binder blows open political conspiracy. DOJ moves in. Outside, when Crockett exited the Capitol steps into a sea of cameras and flashbulbs, someone shouted, Congresswoman, was this your endgame? She stopped just long enough to answer. No, she said. This was the beginning of accountability. Then she walked straight into the night, the black binder still in her hand. Heavier now, not with secrets, but with the weight of proof. By the time dawn broke over Washington, unmarked SUVs were already rolling through 3 states. The first stop was a glass office tower in Arlington, Virginia, Melrose Consulting Group. At 5:42 a.m., federal agents entered the lobby. The receptionist barely looked up before badges flashed, papers were served, and the servers in the back office were disconnected and boxed within minutes. No shouting, no chaos, just precision, like a scalpel cutting through infection. 2 hours later, the second target was hit, a townhouse in Georgetown, leased under an LLC tied to the same consulting group. Inside, agents found 6 laptops, 4 encrypted phones, and 1 handwritten note pinned above a desk. It read, Para 16 fixed. Optics secured. Funding confirmed. The handwriting matched Stephen Melrose. By 9 a.m., every news network in the country had broken into live coverage. Breaking now, federal agents have executed search warrants connected to the Crockett-Haba investigation. Sources confirm multiple subpoenas issued overnight, including one directed at a former state attorney general's office. This is the biggest political corruption inquiry in at least a decade. But inside the Capitol, Jasmine Crockett wasn't watching the news. She was already back at work. She sat in a closed-door intelligence briefing, a black coffee beside her, the same binder on the table. When a colleague leaned in and whispered, "You know they're going to come for you now, right?" She didn't flinch. "I know," she said quietly. "That means it's working." At 10:15 a.m., the first arrest was made. Stephen Melrose, pulled from his own black SUV outside a D.C. garage. He didn't fight. He didn't protest. He just said, "I knew it was the email." Reporters mobbed the street as he was placed in the back of a federal car. The images hit every screen in America within minutes. The same man who had once controlled backroom strategy for one of the most powerful legal machines in the country, now silent, cuffed, and blinking under camera flashes. By noon, the DOJ had announced it formally. Operation Eastwood, an ongoing investigation into unlawful coordination between private counsel and public officials. They named Haba, they named Melrose, and they named 2 aides from the New York Attorney General's office who had resigned the week before. The indictments were sealed, but everyone already knew what they meant. That afternoon, Jasmine Crockett addressed the press in the same hallway where, just weeks earlier, she had first confronted Haba. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't grandstand. She just stood at the podium, folded her hands, and said, "Today is not about vengeance. It's about maintenance, the maintenance of law, of trust, of the idea that our institutions belong to the people, not to whoever can buy the loudest lawyer." She paused. Cameras clicked. If this investigation makes anyone in power nervous, good. That means they finally understand what accountability feels like. A reporter shouted, "Congresswoman, are you saying corruption crosses party lines?" Crockett looked straight at him. "Corruption doesn't have a party," she said. "It has a pattern, and the pattern just broke." The next morning, the New York Attorney General's office announced a full internal audit. Letitia James made a public statement from the steps of her building, voice tight, face strained. "I take these allegations seriously. My office will cooperate fully with all federal inquiries." But behind the camera line, one of her senior aides whispered to a colleague, "She knows it's over." Within days, congressional emails leaked showing that Eastwood Analytics had quietly done business with multiple state-level legal offices across both parties. The scandal was no longer local. It was systemic. And Jasmine Crockett, who had started this whole chain reaction by holding a single blue folder, was now standing at the center of a storm she couldn't completely control. Her chief of staff approached her that evening as she sat reviewing documents under dim light. "They're saying you just detonated the establishment," he said. She didn't look up. "No," she said softly. "I just forced it to tell the truth." That night, as she left the Capitol, a small crowd had gathered outside. They weren't protesters. They were ordinary people, some with homemade signs, some just standing quietly in the cold. One sign read, "Truth isn't partisan." Another, "Crockett for justice." A woman in the front, middle-aged, gray hair tucked under a scarf, called out, "Thank you, Congresswoman. Keep going." Crockett stopped, looked at her, and nodded once. "Always," she said. And in that moment, with flashbulbs popping and voices echoing through marble, it wasn't about headlines or hearings or political fallout. It was about something older, quieter, and infinitely heavier. The idea that truth, no matter how delayed, still lands. Even if it lands like thunder. By the time the indictments went public, America had stopped pretending to be shocked. The country was numb, not from disbelief, but from the sheer gravity of what had been proven. The Justice Department's press release dropped at exactly 9 a.m. 4 names, 12 counts, and one statement that would echo through Washington for months. No individual, regardless of office or influence, is exempt from the law. It was short, clinical, and devastating. Alina Haba, indicted on 4 counts of obstruction, 2 counts of conspiracy, and 1 count of witness tampering. Stephen Melrose, indicted on 7 counts, including coordination of political financing in violation of federal statutes. 2 former aides from the Attorney General's office, charged with falsifying records and destruction of public evidence. And in the fine print, a quiet note, further indictments pending. That single phrase sent tremors through the Capitol. Everyone knew what it meant. This wasn't over. Outside the courthouse in Lower Manhattan, reporters swarmed as Haba exited the building. Gone was the confident attorney who once smiled for the cameras. Her shoulders were hunched, her eyes darting, her lawyer's hand gripping her arm as the questions rained down. Ms. Haba, did you know the edits were illegal? Was the former president aware of the coordination? Do you plan to cooperate with prosecutors? She said nothing. Only once did she glance at the cameras, a flicker of disbelief in her eyes, like someone realizing the lights she once courted were now interrogation lamps. Inside, federal prosecutors read out the charges in calm, deliberate tones. The words "for personal or political benefit" appeared 14 times. At the same hour, on the steps of the Capitol, Jasmine Crockett faced the press again, not as a firebrand now, but as the anchor of a nation rediscovering its balance. What happened here wasn't a witch hunt, she said. It was a house cleaning. And sometimes, when the house is this dirty, you don't dust, you tear down walls. A hush fell across the crowd. She continued, her tone low but resolute. This investigation began with one question. Who edited paragraph 16? That question led to lies, money trails, private deals, and backroom phone calls. But more importantly, it led to proof. Proof that some people in power believed they could weaponize justice for convenience. Today, we reminded them that the law isn't a tool. It's a mirror, and it reflects everyone. Every word was measured. Every sentence struck like a gavel. That night, the headlines were relentless. Crockett's probe brings down legal powerhouse. Accountability arrives in Washington. The black binder revolution. But while pundits argued over who was next, Jasmine Crockett sat alone in her office. Lights dim, city hum echoing beyond the window. Her chief of staff peeked in. They're asking if you'll do the Sunday shows, he said. She shook her head. No. Any statement to your supporters? She looked down at the binder, still on her desk, its corners worn, the pages marked by the fingerprints of history. The work speaks for itself, she said quietly. And it's not done yet. The aide nodded, hesitated, then asked, do you ever wonder if it's worth it? The attacks, the threats, the pressure? Crockett leaned back, her eyes fixed on the city lights. Every time I open that binder, she said, I remember who can't afford silence. The people who don't have a lobbyist, who don't have lawyers, who don't get to edit the truth. For them, yeah? It's worth it. He nodded slowly. They're calling it the Crockett Doctrine now, he said. She gave a tired smile. Let them call it whatever they want, she said. Just as long as they remember why it happened. Outside, the night was quiet. Not peaceful, but purposeful. In New York, Alina Haba's trial date was set. In D.C., new subpoenas were being drafted. In state offices across the country, officials quietly began reviewing their own records, afraid that their names might be the next to surface. And in classrooms, on talk shows, and across kitchen tables, Americans debated something they hadn't discussed in years. What honesty in government should look like. Weeks later, at a small town hall in Dallas, Jasmine Crockett stood before a crowd of voters. No cameras this time, no microphones, just folding chairs and warm air. An older man in the front row raised his hand and asked, Congresswoman, why do you risk everything for this? You could have played it safe. She looked at him for a long moment before answering. Because safe doesn't save anything, she said. And silence doesn't fix corruption. Someone has to be willing to lose something to make the truth worth winning. The room fell still, and for the first time in weeks, she smiled. Months later, when history books recorded the scandal that shook the Capitol, they would list dates, charges, and names. But buried in the footnotes, under a section marked Key Witness Hearings, there was a single line. Representative Jasmine Crockett produced the black binder, evidence that ended an era of impunity. No dramatics, no flourish, just a record of what had happened. And maybe that was the point. In a city built on secrets, she had proven that truth could still breathe, even if it had to fight for air.